Schools in KwaZulu-Natal were forced to send pupils home early because they couldn't provide meals to them. However, Premier Nomusa Dube-Ncube says the glitches that led to the disruption of provision of food have been resolved. The DA's Francois Rodger joins us now to discuss the situation and how donors can play a role. Francois, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. So we heard yesterday, at least during the Premier's budget vote, tabling that in the legislature, that the problems that engulfed more than 5,000 schools in the province have been resolved. However, we are getting mixed reports today that actually this is not the case. What is the situation on the ground?
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to your viewers. Yeah, in fact, the Premier did say that the matter is resolved, but it's not entirely resolved. We're still aware of schools, particularly on the south coast of KwaZulu-Natal, where the schools haven't yet been serviced by the service provider. And you were correct, at the return of school after the Easter holidays, some 5,400 schools opened with absolutely no feeding scheme available and no food available to the pupils.
So what is at the heart of this? Because the Premier also promises action on the school nutrition bundle. So meaning that there are people who should be held accountable who didn't do what they were supposed to do. So what was supposed to happen and what went wrong?
Exactly, Thabo. So my understanding was that a new service provider, one service provider for the entire province, had been appointed, and it's obviously a substantial contract. It's in the millions of rands, and it obviously started off on a really bad foot. In the past, the Department of Education had used various suppliers and service providers in the different districts, but they felt that this model where they would do wholesale buying of the food products and then get it distributed would actually save them money. Well, we'll only know at the end of the first month or two whether in fact there's been any saving, but obviously it's been an absolute disastrous result. And as you were saying, some of the schools have had to send the children home earlier, remembering that we're quite a rural province, and in some of our deeper rural areas, I mean, those are important meals for those children in those communities.
So is the problem, would you say, at government official level, or is it a problem that's with service providers here?
Well, obviously, we're going to have to investigate, Thabo. We weren't part of the appointment of the service provider, but we would now have to look and investigate and see exactly what process was followed in this particular matter. And I think the MEC must step up, MEC Mbali Fraser. She is the head of the Department of Education, and I think she needs to come clean, and we need to be, the people of the province of KwaZulu-Natal need to understand who the service provider was, how the service provider was appointed, and how things went wrong in the very first day.
What are you suggesting then as the Democratic Alliance as far as intervention now? Because you've got a number of thousands of children actually who are starving at schools. We are receiving reports here from other areas who are saying even the supplies that did show up on Tuesday were not nearly enough.
Yeah, indeed. And, it was sad to hear the Premier say, I heard her being interviewed, I think it could have perhaps been with your channel, where one of the comments she made was, well, they had old stock left. And, we shouldn't be feeding our children old stock. That is really a poor indictment. But nevertheless, what our young mayor did in Mgani, Christopher Papas, he immediately engaged with NGOs up in the Howick and the Hilton community and some of the business leaders in that community, and they've already rallied up about 70,000 rands worth of relief, which they are now assisting those schools that are having challenges. And obviously, we'd like to challenge all the other mayors in the areas where there are problems. Put up your hand and let's deal with this problem, as a caring society until the Department of Education can sort this mess out.
Yeah, from what we're hearing from the party, they've at least directed the Education MEC to resolve the matter, and the party says she would be outlining solutions in her budget speech tomorrow. So we're hoping to hear then tomorrow what the resolution is going to be. But what do you suspect would be the way forward here?
Well, I can tell you what I expect to hear is that it'll be a blame game. Nobody in the department's going to take accountability. They're no doubt going to blame the service provider. But what I would like to hear the MEC say tomorrow is to roll out or to give us an action plan and to give us timelines and timeframes with which this service provider is going to ensure that all 5,400 schools have food. We can't be 2 weeks down the road and we're still having challenges. So, if the MEC wants to make up for this mess, tomorrow's her opportunity to give us the way forward with timelines and time frames as to when each and every school will get its fair share of the nutrition program.
And generally, I mean, when you look at just the history of the school nutrition program, if it's not Equal Education, it's some other civil society organization that is always either challenging government in court or forcing it to actually deliver on this school nutrition program. What are we getting particularly wrong around the delivery of this service?
I think it's a minor issue. I think to the ANC in the province, I don't think it's a priority. We can see that. I mean, I've visited schools out in rural areas and in some of the more urban areas. And if I look at the quality of the food that some of these children are getting, it's really diabolical. It's embarrassing. And you've then got to say to yourself, well, do we have a caring Department of Education? Because there can be no other reason. It's not difficult. It's not a complex situation. To calculate how many pupils you are, we should have dietitians who calculate exactly what each pupil needs, and it's then appointing a service provider, a competent service provider, to ensure that that is delivered. But I would be really interested to see who the service provider is and exactly under what terms they were appointed. We have a dreadful history in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. We saw that during the COVID pandemic. And I might also add, Thabo, that if you remember during the COVID pandemic, the courts in KwaZulu-Natal had to enforce the Department of Education to feed the children during the pandemic period, because the department put their hands up and said they weren't going to do any feeding, and it took the courts to actually enforce the feeding scheme to be implemented by the Department of Education.
Yeah, indeed. Francois, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. That is DA KwaZulu-Natal leader Francois Rodger there.